Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure. I always love that feeling of when you go onto the call and already there's some synergy that starts showing up in the field. So thank you for answering that call and coming in today to have the conversation that we're meant to have. You know, I like to do some background on anybody who I'm going to have on the podcast, and I there's so many things about what appears to be the work that you're doing in the world that really speaks to me. But I would love to know, before we even go anywhere with this, tell me a little bit about your background and kind of that journey of where you got to do this work that you're doing right now in the world.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And yeah, as it relates to my background, I never thought I'd be a coach. I was living a life where I was so busy being busy, trying to get somewhere that I thought success lived, where I thought my perfection would be and happiness would be and fulfillment would be. Right. So I was definitely on that track of perfectionism, and unfortunately or fortunately, it was actually the catalyst to awakening from that pattern. So, I used to work 16-hour days, train in the gym for 3 hours, and then still managed to go out on the weekends with the guys. But eventually, that led to an exhaustion point. But the reason why it led to that and why I had that pattern in the first place was actually born in childhood. I had a beautiful life to, beautiful parents, was truly, loved. But for me, like I was bullied as a kid. So it really set up for me a perspective of life that who I was in the world was inadequate. I just wasn't enough. So how to overcome that? Be enough. So like my life's mission became about, I've got to have all the money, I've got to have the right girl on my side, the number one business, I've got to look a certain way, have all of the clothes, fill in the blank, right? Everything that society says is successful. But it reached a burnout point, and it actually led me to such a low that I wanted to leave the world. So that was a real wake up call, because it was either leave or learn. And I'd say there's never any accidents in my world. And I discovered the beautiful industry of personal development that I had no idea existed. And it was the catalyst for really getting some new information that completely changed my life. So that's me in a nutshell.
It's amazing how we can take all of that and be like, and this is what it is. I know it's so much more than that. And
Yeah.
this, your background, first of all, that journey of really feeling like you needed to create a life that showed that you were enough.
Yeah.
At what point did you start to realize that it was sounds like your mindset that was really taking you off track or not allowing you to see the path of going forward?
Yeah, great question. And for me, it lay in the discovery of achieving a lot of the things that I'd set out to achieve. So, one of the things I was bullied for was my weight. So hence being in the gym for 3 hours, then I'll look good enough. And it was actually as a result of like getting into the best shape of my life to actually be earning some really good money. At the time, I was doing a hospitality business, which is fun. But I got that business to number one, and everything on the surface looked amazing. But inside, I was on fire. And it was once I kind of started to achieve those goals that I realized that I still wasn't fulfilled. So it was that was actually the breaking point, linked in with the exhaustion, where I previously didn't even know I had a mindset. I didn't know anything
Mm.
about it. Just who I was for myself was inadequacy. It's quite a weird way to say it, but this is like the whole area of my work, is showing people that they think that they have a perspective perhaps, but they don't realize they are the perspective. And that's why it gets so slippery, because you don't know what you don't know. So for me, it was actually in the achieving of the goals and the burnout, the breakdown. But that was my journey into discovering mindset, and the mindset even existed. So does
Do
that
you
make
feel
sense?
that makes total sense? But I also think we can go. We'll end up going a little deeper with that because
Mm.
it's like you hear it and you're like, yeah, that makes sense, and you're like, how does that actually apply to me? You know, let me take it this place first. Do you think that there's a lot of people struggling in society right now?
100%. We just have to look at the circumstances of the world, and the actions that are being taken in the world that are giving us a certain result. So those are the byproduct of a mindset that people are suffering.
And do you believe it's the mindset that is at the root of a lot of this suffering? Or how would you say it in your own words?
Yeah, yeah. So as it relates to the bigger picture, it's a big conversation. I like to focus on the individual because that's where we have power.
Hmm.
So as it relates to each individual, for me, it does lie in our subconscious, in the subconscious mind, and this invisible ceiling that gets built without our awareness of it. It feels normal to us, but it's not natural. So to understand how things really come about from just my perspective is that you can look at the results that you get that we say that we don't want. So what most people do is they go to experts because they're looking at their behavior that preceded the results that they're getting, which is really logical, right? But unfortunately, if you're just changing behavior, you get maybe a short-term fix, but you haven't got to the reason the few steps before that led to the behavior that gives you the results. So as we kind of reverse engineer this back and we look at, okay, results, behavior, what came before those, thoughts and feelings. And where do those come from? Those arise out of your perspective or your subconscious mind that generates a perspective. So this is where when we get into the root of things and dissolve the what we could say are virus programs,
Hmm.
then the whole cascade actually works beautifully. Because once the subconscious limitations are revealed, your thoughts change, your feelings change, and when you think and feel differently, you take new actions and you get new results. That's
Right.
how we do
That's how we do
it.
it. Just in a nutshell. Just that's all you do with that. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that. So
Yeah.
our subconscious mind is running the ship.
Mhm.
What's influence? Let's just keep this really simple at the start. What's
Yeah.
influencing? What makes up all that information in our subconscious mind? Where does that come from? Is that from our childhood? What is creating that below the surface? Because we can't cognitively think our way through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing question. And so for me, it's a little bit of all of it, right? So we come in, we could say we're blank hardware. We've got no software installed. And first 7 years are pretty pivotal, and that everything that's in our environment we learn from nature and through conditioning, nurture. So everything that our caregivers are saying to us, but also what we're picking up from our external environment, what are we watching, what are we consuming, all of that will build a worldview. And then for me, where it gets really interesting is in and around language. So when you're sitting in a container with me coaching, one of the things that I do just is my superpower, if you're going to say, would be in listening. It sounds like a bit of a lame superpower to have, but I promise it's super impactful because I'm listening for the language. And when you realize when we come in, we're blank hardware, no software, but the software is in the form of language. That's how we are programmed. So we start to learn language. And as we start to learn language and we get the approval of parents, we could say, we start to learn what works and what doesn't. Suddenly we get a no, and suddenly love, a feeling of being wanted, of safety, we could say, is then suddenly perceived by that little human as no longer being there, or love is being taken away. So that's where we start to build our worldview and how we start to adapt ourselves in order to garner what I assert we all want, which is to be loved, to be wanted, to be accepted, fundamentally to belong.
Right.
So that's just like how I see how it starts to form, and then it solidifies over time through repetition.
Through repetition over and over and over again. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that was a really powerful thing in saying that we look at our outcome, we potentially don't like our outcome. So we look at what just preceded that. That's the action. So then we believe I need to focus on the action as opposed to, and I'm just repeating this back because sometimes the information goes right by us. And then what I heard you say is, what preceded the action? That's the root. And this to me is, oh my goodness, this is at the root, not to overuse the word, but the root of like almost everything that gets really stuck in society. I think about this as being a healthcare practitioner for so many decades is we're always talking about symptoms, we're not talking about root. We're always talking about addressing the symptom. What's the expression in the body versus what's underneath that? What's at the core of that? So that's where I think your work is so powerful. And this has come up several times in my world, but also in the podcast, is it's the subconscious mind. It's the things that are driving the ship behind the scenes that we're maybe not having that recognition of. And it starts early. It starts right away. And then the repetition is just there. So let's talk about this in practical terms. When you have a client, you have this superpower of listening, which, by the way, I think is a brilliant superpower, right? It is a brilliant superpower because words are tone and vibration. And I think people are starting to recognize that there's a vibration of all things,
Yeah.
happiness or joy or fulfillment or good, the good feelings. They have higher levels of vibration, and so does good health. And then the lower vibration is something else. We understand to some degree that some people, you feel attracted through rapport to some vibration. Some of that the is the match for where we are, but we are drawn to people that have higher levels. So when you're working with a client and you're using your listening superpower, you're listening for the words that they're using. Tell me how you might help somebody get down into that root, whether you want to use an example or you just want to speak in wider terms.
Yeah, I mean, I can use like myself as an example, right? I kind of gave a little precursor there as it relates to like one of the ways that I'd say is a part of the construct of the ego, because that's what we're really looking at. It's like it's the idea of ourselves, our identity. You could say persona, ego, there's a lot of crossover. For me, they point at the same thing, but that persona has a construct. And when we really realize that we've been misidentified as it, that's where that can be a huge revelation for someone, because, well, with that goes your fears and your concerns. But part of that construct is, let's say, I'm not enough or inadequacy. That's something that, I was, handling and trying to overcome. That's in the realm of behavior. Oh, so how can I get good enough? How can I be perfect? So like I would be looking in language for ways that they're describing that. So for I'm, not enough, I'll be looking for ways in which they're trying to be perfect, or something like people pleasing. Because if I'm not enough, then I'm going to try and please in order to be enough, to
Right.
get connection. So that would be something I'd be listening for, or there's like definite words that point to somebody's world. That's what I'm listening for. Like, what is the world that you are in that is not the actual world, but it's yours? Meaning, like that subconscious mind, it creates like a lens that we then look through, right? We could call that lens the persona, the ego, right? What I point people to is that actually there's something behind that that can observe who you're being. But for most people, that's a wow, because they just think that they are that. That's what I said before. Who I was for myself was inadequacy.
Right.
So I'd be listening to what is their world constructed of, and it normally like can be reverse engineered into some form of negation about themselves. Like I'm not something, right? And they might use other words that give away things like the pressure that they're putting under, like by saying I should, I must, I need to, I have to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it all starts to build a world that they're trapped in. That my goal is to hear it, show them that it's not true, and break them free, shatter the lens, and then they're just like, I'm in a whole new world. And that is, like, we could say, is freedom, peace, joy, love, all of those beautiful qualities of that which I assert is our true nature, not the ego that we misperceive ourselves to be.
That's beautiful. And so for, whether it was your own experience with this and the person or people that you worked with that helped you get to the root cause of this, or the work that you're doing with others, what are some of the techniques that, we're talking about when we're talking about shattering that belief system, that persona that, that we are? The reason I'm saying this is because I see a lot of people talk about affirmations and things like, if repetition of certain aspects come at us and build this very compelling story within ourselves, then I understand that if people are like, well, I'm going to build some really great affirmations because that's going to shift everything. I
Mm.
struggle with this concept because uh, our brain has lots of data to back up why those words coming out of our mouths aren't true. So, there's a world full of this idea of manifestation and this idea of affirmation. And it's not a completely negative. It's not that it's not at all true, but it feels
Mm.
incomplete to me. Where is your
Yeah.
perspective on that?
Of course, we're 100% in alignment, right? I did a video on this on my Instagram. I took a bit of heat from some very close friends that are coaches. And I love that because, I'm always open to contribution. But when we spoke, I kind of showed them what I meant, and it led to quite a breakthrough for them. So for myself, yeah, we could say, the affirmation is in the realm of the behavior change, right? To get a new result, I'm going to say over and over, I'm powerful, I'm amazing, like I'm a rock star, like whatever is being said into the mirror. But why are you saying it in the first place? Right? Because it's showing me that actually you don't feel powerful, you don't feel amazing. Who you are is like some form of like not enough. There's some form of scarcity, perhaps there's some fear, whatever that you're trying to overcome with a new behavior, but we haven't got to truth. So I find that unless like affirmations they're quite cute and like it's fine, it's not bad, but they don't do anything because as you said beautifully, we've got far too many references with that voice that comes in through the back door that says, no, you're not, no, you're not, you're a liar, you're full of crap,
Shit.
you know? Watch my language. Like I get so passionate when I'm talking about this stuff because I love it, right? And it's just so for me, affirmations, they just don't work, at best. But, first we've got to find why do you think that in the first place? Get to the root of that, show them that it's not true, find full self-acceptance. And then, sure, if you want to get some motivation, you can jump up and down, you can do what you want. I love it. That's cool. But you're never going to get anywhere with that. It doesn't lead to any form of transformation.
How do you show somebody it's not true?
Well, there's many ways, but it's for my favorite way is to like discover where it got established. Right. So yes, this involves going back into childhood. We can see what they're bumping up against in their here and now. Wherever they can't be okay with life, they have resistance, we could say. When you have resistance, you cannot not be in stress, right? Triggers sympathetic mode. So for me, I just look for, okay, we talk about it, and then it's like, okay, can you remember some area in your past where it had a similar flavor? And there always is like a pivotal moment, maybe two or three. They oftentimes can't access it straight away. This is why like having a good mirror, somebody that can really listen, it doesn't have to be a coach, a good friend, but I find in this work, listening, as I said before, is the master skill from my perspective because
Right.
it's presence. We could say presence, being present is listening. So from that standpoint, we discover where it got established. We show them, was it actually true? And is it actually a fundamental truth that who you are is, let's say, inadequate? Keeping that theme going, right? And
Right.
when we discover that they don't actually have, like, it was a great technique I learned from one of my mentors, a guy called Peter Crone, right? I don't know if you've heard of Pete, but
Mhm.
yeah. So, like, he's got a great exercise that he showed me, which is to point out that we don't actually have a physical manufacturing label inside of us that says like Gary Waters born in Grantham. I'm giving my like location details away, but it's not enough. Like there's no physical manufacturing label there. And for anybody listening to this, you can do the same for yourself. So it's not an actual truth. We might have evidence, a lot of it, to back it up because we form the lens. And then, of course, everything you see through that lens is going to represent that world. But as an actual truth, it's not true. And
Right.
that's where we start to find some space. That's where we get to actually realize, okay, it's just in language, it's just in code, which is kind of what I was speaking to before too, right? To bring it fully in, like with a nice little bow around the
Right.
gift here. But it's then we get to see, okay, if it's only in words, then what becomes possible? So if it's not true, it often creates a huge shift in that realization. It shatters the lens, it shatters the world, and then they get to step into creativity. Yeah, because
In the
that's
and in this place of creativity, I could actually just feel the energy shift when you said that. So it's like that idea of starting to separate yourself from this very identifying belief that you have loads of data around, right? And all of a sudden you can create some space from that. It's like, then it's like, well, if that's not who I am, who the hell am I? Like, that's the space of creativity, I guess you're talking from. And that's probably where this wave of relief starts to kind of come into the picture. And then where do you go from there? Like this kind of like you've shifted something, you've, as you say, shattered the lens. Now you've got this giant field of potentiality. What do you do with that?
yeah, it's beautiful, right? So there's a lot of holding involved.
Right. I have my hands
Right?
out. I'm actually literally holding
Oh,
it.
just
Yeah.
tell me. Yeah, yeah, because you've just stepped into a brand new world, right? And from there, it's like Bambi legs. Like you don't know how to be. Like you're in the world, but it's not the world that you're used to. You're kind of tapped
Mm.
into natural, not normal.
Right.
So for that reason, like the way I structure my coaching is like first we get this huge awareness, but then there's the practicing of the awareness and the reminding. I call it dash minding. Like we're going to keep reminding because it's so slippery to fall back into the old patterns because they've been there probably for like 2, 3, 4, 5 decades.
Right.
Right. So that's the art of the coach, is kind of being able to help people see it and
Right.
continuously see it, and then help them kind of become really accustomed to their new world, which takes some practice. But, as you're saying, it's like when we become aware of these beliefs, it's like before we know about them, they're not even like, we hear a lot of limiting beliefs, like, oh, you're limiting beliefs. They're not even limiting beliefs. It's who you are for yourself.
Who you are for yourself.
Yeah, you're
Yeah, you said
completely
that so
oblivious.
well, that part of like, and correct me how you said it, but like you are inadequacy or you are, how did you say that? Do you remember?
Yeah, yeah, like you are inadequacy or you are not enough. That's just who you are. And people
Yeah.
fight for it, right? It's just like, I'll show
So
you my inadequacy. Like, I've never lost that conversation. But
that's so
it's,
true. Yeah.
yeah, because one of the fundamental like parts of the ego is that it wants to be right, even if
Right.
it's about how inadequate it is. That's
Hmm.
what like blew my mind with myself. I wanted to fight for it when I first found out, right? It was like, no, like I'm truly messed up. Like, no.
Right.
And
That
it's
that
not to make light of it, but it's just it is, because I look at people through the lens of like who they are is just, I don't like the word perfection because it speaks to a standard, but they're just an incredible, unique being. There's no one quite like them. And I'm just hearing a story that isn't true, but I've got to make them see that. Otherwise
right.
otherwise it's for nothing.
It is for nothing. And um I suspect in this place of potentiality where you get to fire and wire new ways. Um, at some point, of course, then this trickles out to you think differently. You literally see yourself and the world differently through a new lens. And then the behavior changes. And then, of course, the behavior turns into your results change. And how much, you said like that's the art of your coaching style is creating that, getting to the root of it, then holding the space and bringing your client back to that moment of like continuously, because we've been in a state or a standard for so long that, there is some, I think of it as firing and wiring. We fired and wired that pattern for so long. It's like, the stimulus doesn't even need to be there and it just starts firing and more and more. And so we can change that, and we do change that. So, how important do you think rock bottom is in this experience?
Yeah, it's again a wonderful question. I just want to say I love how like amazing you listen, right? To repeat all of that back because I download pretty fast and like you just
Yeah.
absolutely nailed it. But yeah, rock bottom, that was obviously my experience, right? It was wanting to leave the world. Things had to get bad enough for me to finally look for a different way or exit totally. So it is like my wish that people change for inspiration rather than desperation.
Mm,
It's a very famous Jim Rohn quote, you only change for inspiration or desperation. But what I found that's more, it happens more regularly is that rock bottom point. And, my goal through the work that I'm doing is just to hopefully bring more of the inspiration around. So yeah, it feels like for the ego, it's just a part of it that we have to break ourselves completely sometimes before we'll start to question this worldview that we have and see if it's maybe not true.
right. I mean, I can say from my own perspective, and I'm really grateful, first of all, that you stayed in this plane. You
Yeah.
stayed in this plane. Your work is needed. It's important. You're important. And, I actually feel like there's a lot of, I mean, every human's beautiful, but there's a lot of beautiful humans in the world right now who feel very much at a tripping point in this. And I I am always wanting to connect with the understanding, meeting someone where they're at, and also providing that inspiration. But I also will often say to people, so I am curious what you think about this. The shame that's associated with our own rock bottom, or when we're on our way to our own rock bottom, like we can feel it. And it's a slippery slope. I think to some degree, you already said that. And yet also, I feel like oftentimes the best of comes from those places. It's like when we have nothing to lose, or so it feels, that's when we can truly get to the work that we're meant to do. So, yeah, first of all, I just want to put that out there. How does that land for you?
Yeah, it's, when we're in these really dark states, if, somebody that I love to study is a guy called David R. Hawkins. And I don't know if you've heard of David, but he's, for me, my main man probably, I'd say. I listen to a few people, but he created the map of consciousness. And within that, he delineates these different states. And the reason why I'm sharing it is that shame or guilt, those are right at the bottom of the scale. So energetically, they're incredibly powerless, and I know those feelings. That's what allows me to authentically sit in front of someone. And it just happened this week. And they're like, "You don't know how I feel." I'm like, "Actually, yes, I do." Right. So it allows me to really connect with people at the lowest of levels. But yeah, it's tough. It's difficult. It's like a vicious spiral down, and that's where oftentimes we do hit that breaking point. And the hope there is that there's good, people around them that can notice that, can support them, and that can help them maybe seek some kind of advice.
Yeah. Lots of good things can come from that place with time and with repeated, showing up and support. I would also like to talk about this idea of there's seems to be a lot of talk, I would say, And I feel like this is in the younger generation, so I'm kind of dating myself here, and I could be wrong, so I'm really up for that. This idea of people being triggered a lot. You hear it. That's kind of a buzzword. I was triggered by this, I was triggered by that. And, what role do you think? I mean, what is a trigger really? That's one question I guess you could ask before we talk about something. It's always great to actually talk about what it is you believe a trigger is. As if it's something, though, I hear that triggers something that happens to us, right? Like it's everyone else's responsibility because they triggered us, as opposed to maybe this potential understanding that a trigger is something that is really just a pattern of something that's happening within us. You know, is this in your wheelhouse, this idea of like, what is this all? Why is the world feeling so triggered these days? Can you explain that, Gary? Come on. Why is the
Yeah,
world feeling so triggered these days?
amazing. So yeah, I can see why we're connected because this is totally my wheelhouse. For me, like, I don't want to use bad language here in case it gets bleeped out, so I'll try and be a little more polite and be more English. But
Okay.
I call it a gift wrapped in poop. We could say whenever we get triggered. You can imagine the word that I normally use,
Yes.
right? But yeah, for me, it's a gift. And I know it doesn't feel good. That's why it's wrapped in poop. I'm making myself laugh because I've never used these words before. But, it's basically a gift. And for most people, it doesn't feel like a gift, which I get, but it's pointing to us where we're not okay, where we can't be with life. The triggering is actually in the energy of resistance. So it's saying, I can't be with things how almighty me, my ego thinks they should be. Like, if you get that, it's the audacity, right? It's like me walking out today and I caught myself, it was drizzly raining here in the UK. It's March. And I was like, almost had this expectation that it shouldn't be raining. And I laughed at myself because it's funny. But it's like, so. So yes, it's the triggering. Everybody's triggered because there's an underlying, like, part of them that just can't be okay with what they're with in that moment, right? So for me, the gift is, as the coach, it's listening to where people get triggered because it's showing me something. So wherever you can't be okay with life, you're compromised. So it literally is, okay, they're in resistance, and that's not like I said before, that's not a happy world. That's the world of stress. You cannot be in resistance and not feel stress. So as you said, like, life is happening to me is a false perception. That's pure victim. There's no power there. Nobody that I work with stays in victim for long. When I show them is that life is not happening to you. You're just perceiving it that way. So when we really get that it's actually our inner world that leaves our outer world, not our outer world that leaves our inner world, we get to see that actually it's our perspective that is creating our own resistance. And that's the gift wrapped in poop.
This is going to probably create the bleep. I call that the shit sandwich. I'm pretty sure that's what you're calling it too.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to take your stool and wheel up to the table and, take a look at your shit sandwich. And it's,
I love that. Um,
well, it's true. We've all had different, sometimes it's a platter of them, but whatever it is, I assure you, there's something good in there. Okay, let's talk about desire for a little bit. Um,
mm,
you know, I think, again, I think this glances up against this idea of affirmation and manifestation and all these things, which, again, I'm going to say this because I know I'm going to get some comments back. I like what you said. It's like, it's great. It's fun. It is empowering on the foundation of the real work, right?
yeah.
They aren't bad things to do, but without the deeper work, it's just, it's like putting wallpaper over a cracked up wall. So it's this,
Yeah.
where do desires fit into this idea of creating the kind of life that you desire to live?
Yeah.
Is that an issue? Is that a resource for us? What is that?
Yeah. So, I never make anything wrong. I just try to understand it, right? So, but as it relates to desire, the desire is coming out of, you could say, two branches, is that either I don't have something. So I'm desiring it, or I do have something that I don't want, desire, right? So for me, the desire is, there's nothing wrong with desiring it, but it's what is the energy it's coming out of, right? So we could look at the construct of the ego again and say a part of it is in the world of scarcity, like I don't have,
Right.
right? So from that element, we're going to have desire. So if we actually get to the root cause and show that actually no, like from our true self, we could say that we are whole and complete, then there's no scarcity. Then we get into the energy of freedom to create rather than fear to avoid what we desperately don't want, right? So for me, it's the getting back to the root cause. I keep pulling people back to that, because then desire, it actually diminishes once we know our own true value.
Hmm.
Then it's just fun, right? I'm massively creative. I'm up to a lot of stuff, right? But I can be okay with if it doesn't work out,
This
right?
this slides into this idea of allowing and surrendering, big themes in the world, and there's lots of resistance to it because the idea, I think, of surrendering for a lot of people just feels like you're giving up.
Mm.
I think that there are some people who might, if they've not had experience with this kind of transformational change that you're talking about, the idea of like telling yourself you're enough, acting like you're enough, and then, it's, oh gosh, if I do that, if I take the bar, my standard, and I lower it down, right, by this belief that I'm already enough because I've only created what I have wanted in life, if I keep raising the bar and make that the standard. This is why. Now, we don't need to go back into this because we've talked about this. This is the trick. This is the programming in the brain that, and also let's just say, look out into any marketing strategy in the world. There is lots of evidence. There is so much being sold to all of us every single day based on these limiting beliefs. So, it's in this way, I will say, it's really not your fault because if you think that you're enough, if you believe that you are enough, more than that, if you believe and you are living as enoughness, to use a Garyism, then then those things that are being sold to us, we're going to look at it through a different lens, right? Not that we might not consume them, but we're going to be consuming them from a different energy. So I want to say that because in some ways, the default system is strong, and this is where there's work. And I want to say that because a lot of people might look at you, Gary, and go like, I would love to be like him. I see how he moves about the world with this freedom and this ease and this boundless curiosity and all these pieces. But I think the part that we fail to really take in is what's involved in shifting like that, like how much it's actually going to take. And I want to bring this forward because as coaches, I know a lot of times someone comes in, they want a shift and a change, but they have a fixed amount of time in their brain of like what it's going to take. Let's talk about a little bit. Now, everyone's different, of course, but let's just talk a little bit about the truth or more of the reality of like, how do we shift ourselves ultimately out of a lot of these states that are in a lot of us because we're human.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great place to start. And I love what you shared. And yeah, it's one of the things that I love to bring to people is to help them just embrace their humanity. That can be a big weight off, hey, you're human. We're all doing the best that we can do. But yeah, there's all kinds of components. I often get the question at the beginning of, like, let's say if I'm doing a discovery call with somebody, like, how long is this going to take? Right. And I always answer with, I've got the most unsatisfactory answer for you. And they're like, what's that? I'm like, I don't know. You can imagine how that's met. They're like, what do you mean you don't know? Right. But for me, there's so many components to this. Like, it depends on, let's say, the degree of, we could use the word trauma. I don't use it lightly,
Yeah.
but what somebody has been through will determine perhaps their context, their world that they're living in. that can be quite hard to let go, depending on like how long ago it was. And then we could look at age. The longer we've had, as you said, the firing and the wiring, that programming has got a lot of glue on it, right? That keeps
Right.
it stuck. But it also depends on things like, it's a more esoteric conversation, but karma, will play its role. So that's why I can't ever give somebody an answer. But what I can say to someone is that you'll get my absolute best. And, if you're committed, if you keep showing up, then we're going to find like little bits of freedom that will hopefully lead to a huge breakthrough.
Right.
And, not to sound like too confident, but I've never not had anybody shift. So that for me is like, as long as they've showed up, as long as they've played full out with me, then you do get like the impact, you do get the results.
It's true. I also think that's really well said, first of all. And I feel like it needs to be said in some degree, because a lot of times we have a preconceived, this is about everything, by the way, like, you want to transform your body in the gym, or right? Like, how do I return to better health? I mean, these are all rooted in everything you've already talked about. And also, there is a time component to things. And this is also where self-compassion and humanity comes in, right? Being the humanness of
Yes.
who we are. And I also feel like all of the things that you're talking about becomes an ongoing practice, right? Like, this is an ongoing practice. It's like you see it within yourself, you realize it within yourself, you have this deep awareness, you can observe it within yourself, and then it's the practice of letting yourself not go back to that, or therefore create some other, type of limiting belief that changes the way you're showing up in the world. The practice is an important part of it. Would you? Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like you and I could chat forever,
Well,
right?
yes.
I
So
think we probably will. We'll end the podcast before
yeah.
I keep talking for
And
ages.
so I'm
Yeah.
asking this question because what are some of your, once someone's done some of this work, not like, the door closes and that's it, but whatever, like you've done this work or you're doing this work, you're committed to it. What are some of your favorite practices, or just even a couple of them?
Yeah. One of the things that I give all of my clients as an invitation is like my blueprint to a morning practice. So I love the word practice. I don't like routine because, again, with the language, it speaks into it's like monotonous. It's boring. Like, I don't want to do it. Like, who wants to do their routine? Right. So practice opens up via language and expansion, that it can always be better. It can always improve, or it can just be different. I prefer that, because otherwise, like, we're trying to achieve something, which kind of are, but we're not from my world. Right. So yeah, as it relates to those, I've got like a morning practice that's just an absolute non-negotiable for me, not because I have to do it, but because I love to do it. This is speaking into those words that can be very confining. Like, if I have to do it, again, we get into pressure. So like, I love to do it. I get to do it. And it excites me because like, it sets my frequency for the day. And
Mm-hmm.
when we really get that our frequency is actually that which precedes form, then like it becomes like super exciting to set my frequency, and it feels better, right? My vibration, as you were speaking into before.
Right.
So for me, I like to wake up slow. I instantly, as I wake up out of bed, it's just I get very present. Like, I can feel the warmth underneath my duvet. I feel the covers. Like, I lean out to the glass. What's its texture? What's the water texture? So I'm just present. Like, my mind's not off to the future, or, you know, trying to predict what's going to happen that I'm going to try and avoid, or like history that I haven't processed yet. Right? That's more a conversation about time, our relationship to time. So I'm just present from the get-go. And then it very much is mind, body, soul. So there's a workout component to my day. I eat like ridiculously healthy from my perspective, because I love this vehicle that I've got to interface in this cool reality. Like, I look after it, knowing that like, I have a body. Maybe I'm not that. I can remove the maybe. And then so yeah, there's a meditation process that I love to do. I love breath work. I'm pretty sure you're big into that from what I've seen, right? And I love to revise, either things that I've learned. So for clients, it would be like the awareness shift that I would bring to them. Whatever we're working through, I provide modules for people. So they often are reading that a bit like a book to a certain degree. But I love like what a Dr. Joe will talk into about like being in a theta state and being able to absorb information a lot easier. So I'll often challenge myself to read something whilst I'm still in that kind of groggy state because it goes in faster.
Mm.
So yeah, then it's in the gym and kind of by 9 a.m. I'm rocking and rolling. I'm ready to go create freely. That's kind of like a little snapshot.
Well, I think those things are really well, I know those things to be really powerful. And I've definitely seen this where with clients where it's like it's not just about the morning routine. It's like, no, it's not just about the morning routine. But have you ever had the experience of your morning practice? Because the morning practice, like you said, if you're calling it a routine, it has a different connotation, but it's the practice. Because I think in all of this, we're practicing, right? Humanness. We're in the practice of being a human, you know?
Yeah.
There's a lot to consider there. I really love this conversation. I'm going to point in the show notes back to a few of the people that you talked about, Joe Dispenza and Peter Crone, and there's somebody else you mentioned. And I'll go ahead and put those in the show notes. For anyone listening, it's always cool. I love it when I talk to somebody and I'm like, I love where they're coming from with this. Who do you look to? Because, not only can they turn around and be like, who's this Gary Waters? And I want to know more about what he does and all those things, but also where does he gain inspiration? What are the pillars of his lifestyle so that I can have a better understanding and see how this feels in my own world. So let's talk a little bit about how could somebody, number one, find you in the world and also work with you?
Yeah, so to find me pretty easy. It's garywaters.co.uk. Being a Brit, I've got the .co.uk. I couldn't get the .com. I think some Canadian clothes company with my name. So I haven't got a clothes brand, I promise. But, I'm not sure. But yeah, so garywaters.co.uk or Instagram's the main social that I use. I am Gary Waters. Again, I couldn't get the old normal Gary Waters on there. And then I've recently launched a community called the Limitless Collective that's actually being housed on Facebook, and it's completely free. It's been born actually out of having so many requests for coaching, and it's not the cheapest to work with me. That it's just my commitment to want to share. We do a weekly call, and anybody's welcome to join that.
That's really beautiful. Limitless Collective on Facebook. You also, you work, and let's just talk to this. You do work one-to-one with clients, and I'm assuming probably in different layers of duration and so on. So I would say to anybody who is interested, it starts with a self-discovery or a discovery call, correct?
Yeah, depending on my schedule. It's super busy right now. I'm actually helping out a mentor in his program, as well. So it's super busy. But yeah, it's just reaching out, and if there's space in the schedule, it's a discovery call. Just see if it's team fit,
Yeah.
and from there, I know that there's so many beautiful coaches, and some people resonate with a different
Yeah.
energy. So it's nice just to make sure. So yeah, it's via discovery call, and then we can see
And
where
go
we go.
from there. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary. You and I kind of wove together on all of this, and I really appreciate not only coming to the conversation, but also coming to the conversation with tangibles. I think there was a lot of really important, the kind of information that I think listeners could listen to more than once. It's that kind of thing where it's like, there's a lot packed in that little sentence that you just said there. So this might be something that listeners listen to more than one time. So I just really thank you for bringing your whole heart to the conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. And I just want to actually acknowledge you, if it's okay, because I see how you show up in the world. I keep an eye on your Instagram, and just the size of your heart, how much you give to like all of the people you encounter in your community. It's really wonderful to see, and it means a lot when people give me their time. I'm here with you, but like this is your life, this is your time, and to give that in this space with me is a true gift. So thank you for being you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you for that. And thank you, everyone who's listening. It is not by chance that you're listening to this podcast right now. So I want you to take that in. If there's something that inspired you in this conversation, please do something with it, something. And if you tap in, you might actually know what that is. Maybe it's because somebody else needs to hear this conversation. And if you could share it with them, that would be wonderful. If you'd like to drop into our DMs and tell us, tell us your sticking point. Tell us what inspired you in this conversation. Ask us a question, give us a comment. We love all of it. We truly appreciate your time. I appreciate your time, Gary. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Check out the show notes for all the connections and all the ways that you can connect up with Gary. Now, go out there and create yourself an amazing day.